They didn't think I'd hear it, the way they whispered like the walls had gone deaf. But houses remember, and so do women like me. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 68 years old, a widow for the past 11 years, and until recently, the quiet kind of woman people assumed would fade politely into the wallpaper. I never had children of my own, but I've raised enough people to count, cooked enough meals, listened to enough heartbreak, paid for more than a few crises that weren't mine, all without asking for anything in return, except maybe a little decency. It was my late husband John who once said, "Family will test you in ways strangers never dare." At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Now, I think he was being merciful. The house I lived in, I suppose, was never just a building. It was John's grandfather's. Then it became ours. Over the years, we poured everything into it: time, savings, love. After John passed, it was just me. And for a while, that was enough. Then Beth came back. Beth is my niece, my sister Diane's daughter. Diane died young. Cancer. It hollowed her out in 6 months. I was the one who stepped in, held Beth's hand at the funeral, and told her, "You'll never be alone." She was 12. I was 40. And from that moment on, I became more than an aunt. I was her fallback, her backup, her quiet guarantee. So when Beth and her husband Greg asked if they could stay at the house, just for a while, after they hit some financial bumps, I said yes, without hesitation. It was meant to be temporary. I even moved into the smaller bedroom and let them have the master suite. No complaints, no strings. Over the next few months, they started making little changes, rearranged the furniture, repainted the dining room. Beth once suggested knocking out a wall to make the kitchen more open concept. I laughed. I thought it was a joke. Turns out, I was the punchline. I first heard about the party from my neighbor, Judith. "Oh, it's so lovely they're throwing that big birthday bash for Beth. I didn't know you were hosting." Her smile was bright and innocent. My stomach turned. I hadn't been told there was going to be a party, let alone that it would be at my house. That night, I sat in the back garden, knees stiff, mug of lukewarm tea in my hands. Inside, through the kitchen window, I could see Beth moving around like she owned the place. She had her phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, laughing. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the wind carried her words to me all the same. "Just don't invite her, okay? She brings nothing. Honestly, she just hovers." There was a pause, then laughter, light and cruel. I felt something loosen in me, like a button snapping off a coat I'd worn too long. My heart didn't race. My blood didn't boil. It was worse than that. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out from the inside and left the shell, standing. "She brings nothing. Not thank you. Not she raised me. Not even this is her home. Just nothing." I went to bed early that night. Didn't say a word, but I didn't sleep either. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking of the photo I'd seen earlier that day while cleaning, Beth at 16, holding the puppy I surprised her with for her birthday. Her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was real. I'd made that smile happen. I'd worked double shifts to afford that dog. Was that nothing? I thought of John, how he used to say, "You can be good to people and still be forgotten. That's the hard truth." I never believed him, until now. By morning, something inside me had settled. Not like dust, no, like a decision. They didn't want to invite me? Fine. But I would still show up. And this time, I wouldn't come empty-handed. The thing about old houses is, they don't just hold furniture. They hold moments. Memories that creak under your feet and whisper through the curtains. That house, my house, was never meant to become a battleground. It was a home built with love, one slow, splintered board at a time. John and I bought it just after we got married. It was falling apart then, roof leaking, windows swollen shut with time. But we had dreams bigger than the floors. Every weekend we fixed something. He replaced the floorboards. I painted the shutters red. We planted roses out front, even though we knew Ohio winters would try their best to kill them. We didn't have children. We tried, for a while. I miscarried twice. Quietly. Painfully. He held me every time, and we never said the word failure. Instead, we poured everything we would have given to a child into that house, into each other. Then came Beth. When Diane passed, Beth had nowhere else to go. Her father had disappeared years earlier, and Diane hadn't spoken to much of the family. I remember the knock on the door that day. Beth stood there in oversized clothes, clutching a garbage bag full of belongings, eyes too old for 13. She didn't cry, not until she stepped into the kitchen and saw the pie cooling on the counter. Diane used to make pie. That broke her. I raised Beth like my own. School mornings, packed lunches, late-night homework stress, sleepovers, heartbreaks, every messy, beautiful part of being a teenage girl. I was there. I missed her graduation because of pneumonia. I still regret it. And I never stopped being there, even after she got married to Greg. They moved into a one-bedroom in Columbus. I helped with the deposit. When Greg got laid off and they fell behind on rent, I offered the house without thinking twice. That was 3 years ago. They'd promised it was temporary. "Just 6 months, Aunt Margaret," Beth said, pressing my hands. "You're a saint." I gave them the master bedroom. Greg said, "That's too much," but took it anyway. Beth said I was like a second mother, that she'd never forget it. She forgot it. Slowly, like erosion, the house stopped feeling like mine. I wasn't consulted when they rearranged the living room. Greg painted over John's office without asking. The green walls John and I chose together? Gone. Replaced with trendy beige. They took down our wedding photo and replaced it with abstract art, Beth said matched the aesthetic. She didn't ask. She just did. I said nothing. Because when you love someone like they're your own, you excuse things, you explain them away. They're stressed. They didn't mean it. They're just finding their place. Until one day you realize you've made yourself smaller so many times, you don't recognize your own shape. A few months ago, Beth brought up the deed. "Have you ever thought about just transferring it officially? That way you wouldn't have to worry about taxes or paperwork. We could handle it." I laughed, brushing her off. "That's not something I'm in a rush to do." She smiled. "Of course. Just thinking of your future." But it wasn't about my future. It was about theirs. I never finalized the transfer, just filed a temporary trust agreement so they could handle utilities and basic paperwork. I thought I was helping. I didn't realize I was handing over a loaded weapon. Now, as I stood in the hallway staring at the portrait of John that Beth hadn't yet taken down, I felt a wave of shame, not at them, but at myself. For letting it happen, for being too trusting, for thinking love guaranteed respect. John used to joke that I had a heart too soft for a world with claws. Maybe he was right. But even soft hearts have teeth when they've been wounded enough. I walked to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my old cedar chest. Inside was the file, labeled House Documents. The deed was there, still in my name, still mine. I ran my fingers over the signature line. John's signature sat beside mine from the refinance we did before he died. Below it, my own signature. Shaky, faded, but real. They'd planned their future without me in it, but they'd forgotten one thing. I built that future. And now, I was going to take it back. The day of the party arrived with the kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath. Grey, still, uncertain. I was up before the sun, not because I had anything to do, but because I couldn't sleep. The weight in my chest felt like a stone, one that had been forming for years but had finally dropped. I brewed tea in the same chipped mug I'd used since John passed. The handle was cracked, but I still used it. Some things are worth holding on to, even when they're broken. Through the kitchen window, I saw the beginnings of their celebration. Balloons tied to the front gate, a white tent being assembled in the backyard, caterers unloading trays of hors d'oeuvres, strangers in my home, setting up a party I wasn't invited to. The smell of rosemary and lemon drifted through the air. I used to make lemon rosemary chicken every Sunday. I suppose they kept the recipe. At 9:20 a.m., I walked down the hall quietly. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I just wanted to retrieve a few things before the house was flooded with people who would barely remember my name. I turned the corner toward the study, the only room they hadn't touched. John's books still lined the shelves. The old leather chair, cracked and worn, sat beneath the window where he used to read the paper. As I reached for a photo album on the bookshelf, I heard them, their voices, Beth and Greg. The door to the guest room, my old bedroom, was slightly ajar. "She still hasn't left?" Greg asked, his tone low and annoyed. Beth sighed. "I told her the party was private. I don't know why she's being so clingy lately. I mean, this isn't a retirement party. It's my birthday." "You said she'd be gone by now." "She's old. She'll forget. She always does." I froze. Forget? Like I hadn't raised her? Like I hadn't sacrificed my own dreams so she could chase hers? Greg laughed. "If she's not out by the time the guests arrive, we'll just tell her the caterers need the room." Beth chuckled. "She'll sulk for a few days, but what's she gonna do? Sue us?" There was a pause, and then I heard the one sentence that silenced everything else. "She's lucky we even let her stay. She brings nothing." Again, she brings nothing. I stepped back slowly, my breath shallow. I pressed one hand to the doorframe to steady myself, the other clutching the photo album to my chest. My fingers shook, but not from fear. No, something else was rising in me now. Something heavier, sharper. I walked back to my bedroom without a sound, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in soft shadow, the kind of light that makes you think of endings. I stared down at the album in my lap. The cover was worn and bent at the edges, but the memories inside were crisp. Beth's first day of high school, the night I stayed up sewing her prom dress, her graduation. All moments I had given her, all forgotten. And in that stillness, I made a choice. I reached under my bed and pulled out the box where I kept the deed, the trust papers, the unsigned transfer. I took out the file and placed it on the nightstand. Then I changed into something simple, a pale blue dress John had always liked, one I hadn't worn in years. I brushed my hair back into a low bun, slipped on my flats, and tucked the deed into my handbag. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't need to. I already knew who I was. Let them have their party. Let them laugh. Let them play host in a house they never earned. I wasn't going to stop them, but I was going to remind them. They were only borrowing a home I had already decided to take back. And today, I wasn't showing up empty-handed. I arrived at my own home 20 minutes after the first guest. Not with drama, not with noise, just me, my purse, my flats clicking softly against the stone path, and the deed folded neatly inside my bag. I walked past the balloon arch Beth had ordered, the big wooden sign staked in the yard. Happy 40th, Beth. Let the new chapter begin. A chapter, all right. Just not the one she was expecting. I stepped through the open front door, and the music hit me first. Some upbeat pop song I didn't recognize. Inside, the house looked unfamiliar, like it had been dressed up for someone else entirely. The photographs of John and me had been replaced with stock family portraits, smiling strangers in frames that meant nothing. Even the scent was different. No cinnamon, no lavender from the linen closet, just potpourri and catered perfume. Beth spotted me from across the room. Her smile froze mid-sentence. Aunt Margaret. She hurried over, her heels clicking faster than her thoughts. I, we didn't think you were coming. I thought, you weren't feeling up for it? I smiled gently. I wasn't invited. But I live here, don't I? Behind her, Greg looked like someone had swallowed his tongue. He didn't greet me, just shifted awkwardly beside the mimosa bar. Beth opened her mouth to reply, but I walked past her. Calm. Measured. I didn't need her welcome. I walked into the living room and set my purse down on the old piano bench. It still had dust in the corner. She'd missed a spot. I took out a single manila envelope and placed it beside the birthday cake. White frosting, gold accents, 3 tiers tall. The envelope was addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." Then I turned and walked through the French doors onto the back patio. The roses I'd planted decades ago were blooming just over the fence, their petals blushing in the sun. I sat on the edge of the porch swing and waited, not for drama, not for a scene, just for the truth to arrive. Inside, guests laughed and clinked glasses. Some recognized me and gave soft hellos. Others glanced at me like I was part of the furniture. I didn't care. I wasn't here for them. 15 minutes passed before it happened. A cousin, Ruthie, bless her, picked up the envelope and, thinking it was part of the party favors, opened it in front of everyone. She pulled out the contents, started reading aloud. Her voice faltered halfway through. Notice of revocation, property deed, sole ownership. The room quieted. Then Greg's voice. What the hell is this? Beth snatched the papers from Ruthie's hands. Her face drained of colour as her eyes darted across the page. This isn't real, she stammered. It's very real, I said from the swing. Beth turned to me, shaking. You can't do this? We live here. No, I said softly. You stay here. There's a difference. Greg jumped in, his voice rising. You're going to throw us out at her birthday party. No, I said again. I'm giving you time. You have until the end of the week. You're serious? Beth whispered. I nodded. You planned a future here without me in it. I'm simply following your plan. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was suffocating. Somewhere, a tray clattered. The music stopped. And then someone whispered what the room was already thinking. She owns the house. I stood slowly, the swing creaking behind me. I walked back inside, through the crowd of people parting like water. No one stopped me. Not even Beth. I picked up my purse, paused at the door, and turned once. This home was built with love, not entitlement. I hope someday you remember the difference. Then I left. Not with drama, not with regret. Just dignity and the deed in my bag. I didn't look back when I walked down the front steps. I didn't need to. I already knew what that envelope would do. The moment Ruthie read the first lines out loud, the air had shifted. You could feel it, like the windows had been opened in a storm. Every whisper in that room turned into a silence that screamed. And for once, I wasn't the one sitting quietly in a corner, waiting to be acknowledged. I was the one being remembered. They always assumed I was too soft to fight back, too lonely to stand up, too grateful to make demands. But I had spent my whole life giving pieces of myself away, to students, to Beth, to people who said thank you with one hand while reaching for more with the other. So, no, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. I drove across town to the place I'd already arranged the week before, a small rental cottage tucked near the edge of a lake, surrounded by birch trees and the kind of quiet you can only earn after you've been ignored for too long. The cottage owner, a kind woman named Claire, met me with a key and a smile. Everything's set up just how you asked. Peace and privacy. Exactly what I needed. Inside, I set down my bag and opened the windows. The lake shimmered in the afternoon sun. Birds sang. There were no echoes of slammed doors, no half-heard laughter that wasn't meant for me. Just space. I turned off my phone and made a pot of tea. By sunset, the sky was streaked in pinks and purples, and I could almost hear John's voice again. You don't owe anyone your peace. He always knew how to cut straight to the bone. Later that evening, I finally opened my phone again. Not to reply, just to observe. Beth had texted once, then twice, then called. Aunt Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk, please. Then came Greg. You can't just do this. We've put work into that house. You said we could stay. Work. They painted 2 rooms and planted decorative grass. Meanwhile, I had poured decades into those walls. Love, loss, marriage, mourning. And they thought they were owed something just because they lived there. I didn't answer. I wouldn't. They needed silence to finally hear what I had stopped saying years ago. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, the messages weren't sweet. You're being cruel. How could you do this to your own family? We'll fight this if we have to. That one made me laugh. A cold, tired laugh. Because what they didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was that I'd already secured everything. The legal transfer had never happened. The trust had been revoked. And I'd met with a lawyer 2 weeks before the party, Michelle Barrett, a woman with a spine of steel and a filing cabinet of receipts. Michelle had looked me straight in the eye that day and said, "You're not being petty. You're reclaiming what was always yours." She filed the eviction paperwork quietly, timed with the notice they found in the envelope beside the cake. I told her I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted to leave with the truth intact. "You'll leave with more than that," she said. "You'll leave with peace." Now, as I sipped my tea and stared out over the lake, I realized something. I hadn't just taken back a house. I'd taken back myself. No one clapped when I did it. No one toasted to my name. But I'd walked out of that house taller than I'd walked in. And they'd finally seen what I brought to the table. Not noise, not decoration, not performance, just the deed and dignity. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of lonely I used to feel. This quiet was chosen, structured, sacred. In the cottage by the lake, I learned that stillness can be a kind of symphony when you've spent years being spoken over. Each morning, I made my tea with honey, sat on the front steps with my shawl draped over my shoulders, watched the mist curl over the water like breath. For the first time in years, I didn't check who needed me. I didn't wait for the knock, the favor, the forgotten thank you. I simply was. Beth kept calling for the next 3 days. Greg, too. They tried every tactic: blame, guilt, charm, panic. Michelle, my lawyer, texted me after the third voicemail. They've contacted our office. I've responded formally. They have 7 days to vacate. I asked if they'd tried to contest. She replied, "They don't have a leg to stand on. The property is 100% yours. The documentation is airtight. Let them exhaust themselves. We'll remain still." Still. It was a word that held weight now. I didn't respond to Beth's texts, not when she said, "You're acting out of emotion." Not when she said, "This isn't who you are." And especially not when she said, "Everyone thinks you've lost it." Let them. Let them talk to their reflections and echo chambers. Let them spin a version of me that made them feel better about what they'd done. I was done living in someone else's story. Meanwhile, something beautiful began to unfold. Life. I enrolled in a community garden class. Nothing fancy, just a few local women who met on Saturdays to dig into the earth and talk about things that mattered. I met Judith, a retired nurse who loved sunflowers, and Leah, who had lost her husband in the same year I'd lost John. We shared silence and soil, and it was enough. No one asked me to bring more than myself. Then, about 5 days after the party, Sharon, an old neighbour from Sycamore Lane, sent me a picture. It was Beth and Greg, standing on the curb in front of the house. Their car was overloaded, the trunk tied shut with a bungee cord, trash bags piled beside them. Beth was on her phone, face red, clearly yelling. Greg looked exhausted. The photo was blurry but honest. Sharon's message read, "The royal couple has been dethroned." I didn't laugh, but I did exhale. Not in triumph, in relief. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want them ruined. I just wanted the door closed behind me and my hands clean. That evening, as I stood on the porch, Claire, my landlord, walked by with her dog. She stopped at the gate and smiled. "You look more rested than when you arrived." "I am," I said. "Good," she replied, "because peace suits you." I nodded, unsure how to explain what it felt like to finally live in a space where no one sighed when you entered the room, where your presence wasn't seen as an obligation, where silence wasn't punishment, it was protection. By Friday, Beth's messages had slowed to a trickle. Then, that afternoon, just as the sun was lowering past the trees, my phone buzzed one last time. A voicemail. It was Beth's voice, but smaller. Worn. "You didn't even say goodbye." I stared at the message for a long while. Then I deleted it. Because the truth was, I had said goodbye. I'd said it the moment I picked up the deed. The moment I walked into my own house like a guest, and left like an owner. The moment I realized I didn't need to argue for space anymore. Some goodbyes don't come with slamming doors. They come with one last cup of tea, a porch swing, and the sound of your own name said softly, by yourself. It's been a few months now. The lake has become my morning mirror. I walk its edge each sunrise with my hands in my cardigan pockets, my steps steady. The wildflowers I planted around the cottage have started to bloom. Soft lavender, pale yellow, blush pink. I didn't plan the colours. I just let the soil decide. I think there's something sacred in that, in letting life surprise you again. The house on Sycamore Lane? It sold quietly 3 weeks ago. The new owners, an older couple from Vermont, sent me a handwritten thank you note and a photo of themselves standing in front of the magnolia tree I once planted with John. They didn't mention Beth or Greg. They didn't ask about drama. They only wrote, "This place feels safe." Thank you for building it with love. That line stayed with me. Not thanks for the house, but thanks for the love. Because that's what they never understood. Beth, Greg, everyone who whispered behind my back. They thought the house was just walls, an asset, a prize waiting to be inherited by default. But I knew better. That house had seen grief, joy, music, midnight tears, holiday dinners, quiet conversations by firelight. It held every version of me. Young, in love, heartbroken, healing, alone, strong. And when they said, she brings nothing, what they really meant was, she brings nothing we can exploit anymore. They were wrong. I brought everything. And when they stopped seeing me, I remembered myself. Claire checks on me sometimes. She knocks gently, even though I told her she didn't have to. And down the lane, James, my quiet, flannel-wearing neighbour, waves each morning. He's a retired mechanic who now builds birdhouses for the local park. He brought me one last week, said he thought my garden needed company. We sat on the porch that night, sipping cider. He never asked about the past, just pointed at the stars and said, "Some people think they own everything they touch, but light doesn't belong to anyone." And he was right. Beth tried to post online about being displaced, claimed I had manipulated her, stolen her future. But the comments, oh, the comments, people remembered. Old students of mine, former church members, neighbours. One wrote, "Miss Ellison paid for my textbooks when I couldn't afford them. She deserves more than your pity post." Another, "Family doesn't mean ownership. She gave you a life. That house was never yours." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some truths stand tall without a microphone. And then came the moment I didn't expect. Maybe the final closure I needed. One afternoon, I was trimming the edges of the garden when a car pulled up slowly in front of the cottage. I knew that car. I knew the slumped shoulders behind the wheel. Greg. He stepped out, alone, hair uncombed, tie loosened like he hadn't been wearing it for anything important. He held a plain envelope and walked toward me like someone who'd run out of words long before running out of shame. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I just thought you should see this." He handed me the envelope. Inside were photos, real ones, printed. Beth, smiling, arms wrapped around a man who wasn't Greg, in a hotel lobby, at dinner, in his car, all recent. "She said I was boring," Greg muttered. "Said she married me because I was safe, that eventually the house would give us the life she actually wanted." He looked away. "You were the only one who ever gave her anything real," he added. "And we treated you like background noise." I said nothing for a moment. Then I folded the photos, handed them back, and looked him in the eye. "You get one life," I said. "Don't spend it waiting for someone to remember your worth, especially when you've already forgotten it, yourself." He nodded, said thank you, and left. That was the last I saw of either of them. Back inside, I placed a framed quote near my front door, one I copied from John's final letter. "If you ever find yourself surrounded by people who forget who you are, walk away. You've already given them enough." It greets me every morning like a promise. And now, when I walk into my little living room with muddy gloves and wind in my hair, I know I don't need an invitation to belong. I brought the deed. I left with dignity. And I've been blooming ever since.